Hello, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Milestones. Today, I'm going to just talk a tiny bit about what burnout in motherhood has felt like for me as a lead into a really exciting episode all about burnout in parenting and managing it and in the workplace, all that good stuff. So, here is my take on burnout as a mom. So, I have always been a high achiever. I would consider myself a little bit of a perfectionist. I'm definitely like a more creative person. I'm definitely very impulsive. A lot of the ways I would describe myself in hindsight after being diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood, a lot of the ways that I would describe myself actually are very closely related to that. But in general, I have felt that way my whole life. And the thing was, I had all these methods in place. I've always had methods in place for studying, for cleaning, for getting things done. And it's like post-its, everything's written down. Like, I had methods that worked, I did great in PT school. I did great getting my doctorate. I had methods. And I should say, I truly think that those methods and my ability to be I think that's also a bit where like my OCD like tendencies come in, because it was like I could control so many variables when it was just me, right? So like those methods worked. Then it was like with each additional thing on my plate, like getting a job, getting a house, having a partner, having a child, every additional thing that got added, it was like the methods that had worked my entire life worked a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. And in hindsight, obviously, I feel like there were times in my life where I probably would consider, like looking back, that I was in a little bit of like a burnout mode. But I always kind of just powered through because, again, I had these methods that like really worked until they didn't. And that was really not only a big piece of learning and understanding my brain once I was diagnosed with ADHD and like really, really like doing that work to understand the way my brain works, but it was also the first time that like burnout became so real for me, right? So like for me, when I picture burnout, I picture people like just shutting down, right? Like they're not doing, like they can't do as much as they were doing. They're like super fatigued, all of those sorts of things that I think are like what we think of as classic burnout, quote unquote, or at least I did. But for me, in my burnout in motherhood looked very, very different. For me, it was so tied into irritability and moodiness and like brain fog. Like I've shared about this, and I'm sure at some point I'll share about it more, but like there are huge pockets of my early motherhood experience that I like, if I didn't have photos, I truly don't know that I would remember them. And that is so devastating to me. But also, I've really tried to learn to give myself grace for that, because I was in the process of really, again, understanding my brain, transitioning into motherhood, working through postpartum anxiety. So many things were happening, living in a pandemic with two under two. Like, so many things were happening. But that brain fog really did for me present as like more anxiety, more OCD like symptoms, again, where I was like trying to control every variable that I could control because the post-its weren't cutting it and the methods that I had used my whole life weren't cutting it anymore. And so again, for me, it was so much. And I think that is also part of why it was maybe a little bit challenging for me to identify, because all those methods weren't working. And I wasn't having like the classic like shutdown that I would picture in my head with burnout. Again, it was so much more emotional. It was so much more physical overstimulation, auditory overstimulation, especially when like my kids were just being kids and I would be so overstimulated. And then I would feel so insanely guilty because I'm like, they're just being kids. They're not doing anything wrong. And shout out to noise canceling earbuds, because they don't totally take the sound away. So you can still hear them and it's safe, but they just like limit the amount of input that you're getting. But again, for me, it was that overstimulation, that physical overstimulation where like sometimes even like Jay brushing up against me would like send shivers, and I would be like, you please don't touch me gently. I need you to like squeeze me, like give me deep pressure, give me proprioceptive input, which for the record is super calming. So if you are struggling with feeling touched out, quote unquote, look for or try to express to your partner that like that light touch can be very alerting to our systems and very noxious to our systems and almost put us into like a fight or flight state, versus that deep pressure is super calming for our nervous system. It really resets us. It tells you where your body is in space. It grounds you. So literally Jay knows now at this point, 15 years later, that if I'm like, babe, I need you to squeeze me so hard. I need you to squeeze me like that game when we were kids where like you have the dandelion and you're like, Mama had a baby and his head popped off and you pop it off. I'm like, I want you to like try to pop my head off, seriously. And he will squeeze me and it just completely grounds me. But it took me a long time to figure that out, right? Like that wasn't something that just like happened, you know? And then it was a lot of like, I would continue to try to create routines and create routines based on the methods that I had followed my entire life. And then they wouldn't work. And then I would like beat myself up because I'm like, why can't I stick to something? Why can't I be consistent? Because my brain is constantly going like a mile a minute, you know? So I would get discouraged. I would question if the routine was right for me. I would ditch it and try another. And it would just become like this cycle, right? The fatigue, which again, it's like early motherhood. I didn't sleep train my children. So like that was another piece too, that like, I don't think I teased out how tired I was and that maybe it wasn't solely related to like hours of sleep, you know, brain fog, memory loss, that moodiness, anger, crying, irritability, like just general emotional dysregulation where like the smallest thing I would way overreact, even like knowing in my head that I was overreacting. And then I would be so ashamed and filled with guilt for the way that I acted because like that wasn't me, but I wasn't taking the time to like step back and recognize that like I needed to like reassess and reevaluate and give myself a time to take a breather, you know? Hey friends, Casey here. If you've ever listened to an episode and thought, I wish she'd go even deeper, or I wonder what she really thinks about that, I am so excited to share More Than Milestones Unfiltered, where I do exactly that. More Than Milestones Unfiltered is my private Substack community where I share 2 exclusive podcast episodes every single month. 2 episodes that will never make it to Instagram or the public feed. These are the even more raw, unfiltered stories, harder conversations, and the that's a story for another day moments I usually hold back on. If you want to join me there, just head to the show notes or my link in bio and subscribe. I'd love to see you inside. And I feel like another part of it was like difficulty with decision making. I was procrastinating more and more, which is something that like I really, it wasn't really something I struggled with. I should say I was always like a last minute, like in PT school, it would be like the big project was due. And like, if there were portions of it, I would give myself chunks of timelines, deadlines, because I knew if I waited until the very last deadline, I was going to wait until the very last deadline. So I would give myself like, okay, you need to get this piece done a week before the deadline. And in my head, I would make myself stick to that. Then those methods weren't really working. And that procrastination kind of turned into more like straight up task paralysis. Like I remember standing in the kitchen and being like, I don't even know where to start. Like there's dishes, there's laundry, there's dog hair on the floor. There's, you know, like don't even get me started on, I love my dogs more than life. Like the licking would be enough to like catapult me into another universe. Like I was so overstimulated. And just like physical symptoms, right? Like stomach aches, which again, I had as a child my entire life. And we now know like is related to anxiety, but we didn't know that then, you know, no one really knew that then. But like those physical symptoms, those like headaches, gut issues, that started to come back for me. I had so much trouble following through with like basic routines that centered around me, right? Like I could take care of everything for the kids, but like I didn't go to the dentist for 6 years. You know what I mean? Like I would have them 3 beautiful meals a day with snacks and baby-led weaning and all the things. And it would be like 9 o'clock at night. And I'd be like, oh my God, I had like a scrap of avocado off of the baby-led weaning plate today. Like just truly like struggling with those basic routines that centered around me because I needed to like put my energy into everyone else. And then I think one of the biggest ones for me, looking back now and really understanding myself a little bit more, is related to my tendency towards going inward when I'm struggling. But it's not usually like, you know, I think sometimes when people think of like going inwards, you think of like, okay, I can't get out of bed. I can't like, you know, do my basic tasks. And that was true to an extent, but it was more like socializing became absolutely exhausting. I would consider myself like I would say an introverted extrovert. Like I do really enjoy being around people, but I need time afterwards to just like be alone. Like if there's too much socializing, I'm like mentally, physically completely drained. And it was 100 times worse when I was in like burnout mode, reflecting back now. So for me, it was a lot of like isolating myself, not necessarily, again, like I would be with friends and family, I would be with Jay, but like I wasn't being open. I wasn't being myself. I wasn't like sharing about my struggle. I was literally like internally shutting down and isolating myself, even though I was present. So like I was present, but I wasn't actually present, if that makes sense. And I think part of that is why I also like didn't really share with anyone the magnitude of what I was struggling with when it came to postpartum anxiety, because I just had gone inward at that point. And it's almost like, in my mind, I kind of picture it like survival mode. I don't think I could have taken on more input from other people about what I was struggling with, because I don't even think I realized what I was struggling with, if that makes sense. So instead of sharing about it, I just like stuffed it down, was like one foot in front of the other, do what you got to do kind of thing, while also continuing to like add more to my plate and start a business, because why not? And like, again, that has always been my tendency. Like I am creative, I'm impulsive, I'm always like, oh, let's do this, let's try this. And like the wonderful women that work with me and for me can definitely attest to that, because sometimes they're like, that's a good idea, but let's table that for 6 months until we're not all completely drowning. So that's the fun fact about me. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would love for like the overall message to be from this episode and from the next one is like, burnout truly looks different for everyone. And I genuinely think that most parents at one point or another are going to experience burnout to some capacity, whether you're a stay-at-home parent, whether you're a working parent, whether you're a little bit of both. I just think that the addition of lives that you're responsible for on top of all of the other stuff is really kind of a recipe to overload yourself and end up in a burnout state. And if you're not giving yourself the opportunity to like check in and be like, how am I feeling? And that was the other thing. Like I still 7 years later, still feel like I am learning how to like feel my emotions again, right? Like, and like voice them and acknowledge them versus just like that stuffing down, isolating myself into my own brain, So all that to say, there are so many things that you can do. There are so many methods that I have learned to put in place that have been super helpful, for everything from time blocking to assigning like cleaning tasks for certain days of the week or certain days of the month, having that all written out. Mark my words, as much as I want a physical calendar a digital calendar more than anything in my life. Like those calendars that you put up and you can like color code them, that they look incredible to me. And I probably will get one at some point, and then it might end up just sitting there and being another thing that didn't work, because like I am a Post-it queen. If I don't write it down, it's gone from my head. Fun fact, when I was studying for the board exam, I'm not even kidding, I literally front to back the entire exam study book, which is like hundreds and hundreds of pages. I wrote every single page. And another fun fact, not to toot my own horn, but toot toot, I got a perfect score on the board exam. And I truly believe that it is because I knew what method worked best for me and my brain, and I ran with it. And I mean, I did study my butt off. I basically rewrote a textbook. But yeah, she's lost the plot, guys. I've lost the plot on this one. I think the most important thing to remember is that burnout is so real. Again, whether you're a stay-at-home parent, whether you're a working parent, whether you're a combo of both, whether you're just a human living the human experience. And I think when we can check in with ourselves and take a step back and lean into either old methods to manage or new methods to manage, I think it can make a world of difference. So I don't even know if this makes any sense to anyone, but here we are. And I hope it helps someone. I'm sure it's going to resonate with someone. So stay tuned for that episode with an actual burnout expert that will probably be able to put words to this in a much better way than I can. But I hope this resonates with at least one person out there. And I'll see you next time on another episode of More Than Milestones.